Thank you so much for that. All right, welcome everybody. So glad to have you all here with us tonight. We're glad to get back to our 411 meetings. We took a few weeks off. Everybody's been really busy, and we received a lot of suggestions from you all of the kinds of meetings you wanted for the rest of the fall. And so this was one on the list. You all wanted to learn about how teaching and learning are working in our school district during COVID, and we had several questions come through ahead of time. And before I introduce our special guest from SFUSD, I want to just let you know you can rename yourself in your image, and you can do that by hovering over your image. There's 3 dots in the top right hand corner. If you click on that and see rename, you can add your school name and or your pronouns if you like. Let us know how you're feeling in the chat box. And this meeting is being recorded. We have a meeting I want to let you know about that's coming up in 2 weeks. On October 28th, we will be joined by SFUSD's Chief Facilities Officer, who is going to come and answer questions and let you know the latest information related to the actual facilities and what that might look like when we start bringing students back into classrooms. And so put that on your calendar. I've put invitations out for that already through the President's Listserv and also through the Second District PTA Facebook page. And please share that. We will have interpretation for that event as well. And then we'll be scheduling some more in November and December. We are looking to probably move to doing these 2 or 3 times a month instead of weekly, because the feedback is you all are busy and overwhelmed, but you still want these to happen, that you have found them valuable. So that's how we're going to be approaching the next few months. And we'll just we'll pivot and be flexible as needed so we can support you. And so to introduce myself, I guess I didn't do that yet. My name is Michelle Parker. I'm the VP of Legislation for the Second District PTA. That means that I'm here to support all of you in your advocacy efforts, both in what you might be trying to do at your own schools, but also I coordinate the advocacy efforts for the PTA district-wide. So as we look to, as we took positions on ballot measures for this November, I led that. Anytime we have issues that we are trying to organize everybody around, I do that and hopefully help you learn any of the skills that you need to effectively advocate in your communities. So that is my job. And we have several members of the Second District PTA board with us in the call. And if they haven't already, I'll ask them to also rename themselves so that you know. It's helpful, I know, to put names and faces together as you're emailing us and asking for support at your school. So, so we'll go ahead and do that. And then with no further ado, we'll get on to our guests and our presentation tonight. So we are joined by four leaders in our district: Melissa Dodd, who is our Chief Technology Officer; Jennifer Steiner, who is the Executive Director of Curriculum and Instruction; Jean Robertson, who is the Chief of Special Education; and Jill Hoogendyk, who is the Chief of Staff. And they have lots to share with us. And as I said, we received questions ahead of time. And so after they do a presentation, I will come on and help facilitate those questions. We'll be asking the ones that came in ahead of time first, but if you have any that come up during this presentation and throughout the rest of the hour that we're together, please go ahead and put those in the chat box and we'll try to cover as many as we can. And even if we can't, we'll still collect them and try to get the information for you. And I think that is all. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that Melissa can share hers, and we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for you all spending another hour in your incredibly long day to be with us. Really appreciate it.
Great, thank you. I should be sharing my screen right now, so hopefully everyone can see it. Awesome, thank you for the thumbs up. Good evening, my name is Melissa Dodd. I am the Chief Technology Officer for SFUSD. I'm also a proud SFUSD parent of a 5th grader in one of our elementary schools. So I am experiencing distance learning, both as an SFUSD leader and employee and as a parent as well. I know our Deputy Superintendent, Anikia Ford-Morthel, really wanted to be here with us this evening. She had a family emergency, so the SFUSD team is here to represent, and I will kick us off. We have a brief, hopefully brief presentation that may answer some of your questions. questions, and then we'll have time for Q&A. And if we're not, as Michelle mentioned, if we're not able to answer all of your questions, we'll be sure to capture those and be able to provide responses. So in terms of what we're going to cover in our presentation, we'll share a bit about what distance looks like, distance learning looks like right now as we launched in the fall. We'll talk about some of the supports in place for our educators, for our students, particularly in our focal groups, our families, and then moving into our gradual return in hybrid learning, and then open it up for Q&A. So we ground ourselves in our mission at SFUSD. Every day we provide each and every student the quality instruction and equitable support required to thrive in the 21st century. So our mission really grounds us in our work, in our priorities, and how we organize ourselves as a district. As we launched in distance learning this fall, we have sort of three guideposts, if you will, that we have grounded ourselves in and are striving toward. And it's really in response to what we heard and from our families, from our educators, from the SFUSD community through the spring and summer. We're all experiencing a global pandemic, which is very, challenging and it's very new for all of us. So we've grounded ourselves in connection, in community and consistency. And again, that's what we heard from our families in particular, from our spring experience. As we launched the new year, we also identified our instructional priorities, and we have 4 instructional priorities. One, our anti-racist practices. So especially given what we are experiencing in our communities locally, nationally, and globally, anti-racist practices, and looking at our policies, our practices, our beliefs, and how we teach, how we partner with, and not for or to, and how we manage and lead as a school district. Our graduate profile, the skills and competencies, what we want each and every one of our students to graduate with, that is still our North Star. Wellness and authentic partnership, making sure that connection and relationships is at our foundation. And then with that, what are those consistent structures for support? So as a diverse school district with 120 some odd plus school communities, what are those consistent structures that we have across SFUSD to build coherence? So with that, we'll first share about distance learning from a teaching and learning perspective, and I will kick it over to Jen Steiner.
Hi everyone, my name is Jen or Jennifer Steiner, and I have the pleasure of talking about my favorite subject, teaching and learning. I'm the Executive Director in Curriculum and Instruction and a 20-year educator here in SFUSD. I've been a teacher, a coach, a principal, and for the last 5 years, I've been in curriculum and instruction. And so I want to start out by talking a little bit about the changes that we made this fall, some of which you may already know, but some of the questions that we've heard coming up, we want to make some clarifications, and then going into the curriculum and what you might see if you go into visiting some of the classrooms. You can go to the next slide, Melissa. So the first important thing that I think is really different for us to surface, and again, you may already be familiar with this if you heard this earlier this year, but we wanted to clarify a little bit about the daily instructional minutes, which we heard were confusing for some folks. The Senate Bill 98 and Assembly Bill that came out.
Hello there.
Am I going too fast, Luis? I'm
yes,
sorry.
you are.
I'll go slower.
Thank you so much.
I thought I was going so slowly. I apologize.
No worries. Thank you.
Can you go back one slide, Melissa? Thanks. So last year when we were doing distance learning, no one really knew what we were doing, and including the government. And so this year we were lucky that the government said, hey, we're going to give you some guidelines on what's appropriate for the number of minutes to engage students in distance learning in the fall. And so as you can see at the top of the slide, it outlines that pre-K and kindergarten students should receive daily instruction of about 120 minutes, TK and K 180, first through third 230, and fourth through 12th 240. What we then did is worked with our union, our labor partners, and we developed what would be logical both for students, developmentally appropriate, and doable for educators. And what we came up with is that every single day there needs to be daily live interaction. That's informed by the Senate bill. But there also needs to be a combination of synchronous or live instruction, that's what we're doing right now, and asynchronous or independent work modules. That could be work through Seesaw, it could be work through Google Classroom or Nearpod, depending on the different assignments you have. It might be reading a book or writing in a journal or going and exploring outside in a garden. So we don't want students to be on the screen for 240 minutes a day. We know that's not good for students. And we don't want kindergarten students to be on for 120. So working with what's developmentally appropriate, what we did was give guidance to each of the schools to say, do a combination of short bursts of live instruction and follow it up before and after with bracketed independent instruction or independent work. So you might have a morning meeting and then have some independent time to do some reading if you're in kindergarten or some writing. And then you might have a small group. If you're an English learner, you might get some small group instruction around English specifically. Then you might have a whole group lesson for math or for literacy. And then you might have some independent work. So depending on the school, the type of students that are in the school and the grade, that looks a little bit different. But what we also heard is that we needed some more consistency. So what you will see is we work to try to start school around the same time across elementary schools and across middle and high schools. And most schools are starting around 9 o'clock. And then specifically what we asked for each school to do was to communicate out what's the specific schedule that's happening at that school. And again, the 120 minutes that our labor partners and we agreed upon is what teachers are doing. So minimally, teachers are engaging in 120 minutes of live instruction. It may not mean that every single student gets live instruction for 120 minutes a day, but it may mean that a student might get time with the librarian or time with the PE teacher or time with the social worker, which also counts towards the total minutes from the Senate bill. So hopefully that helps with some of the questions we saw that have been coming up for families. We can go to the next slide. And so as we mentioned before, this would be a combination of this type of Zoom calls or Google Meets, right? Digital distance, where you might be engaging synchronously, or you might be engaging asynchronously, independently on an application. You might be doing some work on Nearpod, which is also on digital distance, or you might be doing something in print-based. So you might be using a workbook, you might be reading a book, you might be writing. And so really trying to give a combination of both digital distance and print-based distance during this time. And so what we worked this summer to do was to support educators. What we did was we learned a lot about distance learning this summer. We learned from listening to families, from listening to students, listening to teachers, reading books, going to webinars, going to all sorts of educational opportunities for ourselves. And what we knew is that we needed to support folks around wellness and authentic partnerships. So we supported schools to create coordinated care teams that would be able to support each and every student and ensure that students who are not engaging in distance learning, who are not showing up to class, can be sufficiently supported. We wanted to ensure that we improved our two-way communication because we heard loud and clear in the spring that needed to be improved. And we wanted to ensure that we had a way to do district-wide wellness
I'm sorry,
checks.
Jen,
And really
you're going again super fast.
Okay,
Thank you.
And we also wanted to do district-wide wellness checks. That means that every single student in the school district gets a phone call from somebody in the school to make sure that they have what they need. They have the housing they need, the food they need, the access they need to digital, to technology and to instructional materials. And if they don't, we leverage the coordinated care team to support them to get what they need. We also knew that we had to support the educators. So we did a combination of support between creating instruction creating instructional materials that I'll talk about in a second, and providing professional learning. And then throughout it all, you can see across the bottom, we wanted to create some consistent structures for support. That's support for students, that's support for educators, and that's support for families. And we'll talk about what those look like. You can go to the next one. So I'm going to pass back to Melissa to talk a little bit about the kinds of distribution efforts we had this year, both in technology, and then I'll talk a little bit about the instructional materials that we distributed as well.
Thank you. So with launching the fall in distance learning, we wanted to work hard collectively with our school communities to make sure that families, students who needed technology had technology at home to support distance learning. So just some of the numbers, we had a very busy August and into September, more than 22,000 student devices, Chromebooks, were distributed, were loaned to families, and more than 8,500 hotspots. Coupling with the work that we did in the spring, we have over 35,000 students that received technology from the district and 12,000 hotspots as well. And we really focused on our focal populations to make sure that we were meeting the needs of our homeless, our foster, our newcomers, our African-American students, our Pacific Islanders in receiving technology to support distance learning. And a little different approach that we took this fall from the spring. If you received a device from us in the spring, it was probably at one of our central hubs. But in order to get, knowing the volume that we needed to reach pre-K through 12 now, we really leveraged our school communities and sites for the distribution, and a huge shout out to our school communities. They were phenomenal in providing resources and doing the outreach. As a technology department, we were there to support and partner with them, but we really leveraged the school sites for that. And schools now have a regular cadence that they make themselves, that they're available for any new needs or exchanges. Schools are also delivering directly to homes. We're working with schools to mail devices to families who might not be able to pick up technology. And again, we know, we all, internet is a national need for us, and really working as best we can to support the internet connectivity needs that our families have.
And if you click again, yeah, thanks. We also made a similar effort to ensure that students had sufficient print-based instructional supplies. So since August, what we have done is we've ensured that each of the pre-K2 students have received Let's Go Learn supply kits. Those were supply kits that had scissors, glue, journals, trying to think of what else they had, some other materials in there that would be useful for students at home. We also ensured that from kindergarten through 5th grade, students had a workbook that they could write in. We delivered English language development workbooks to over 15,000 students, for students that are learning English as a second language in kinder through 5th. And we also distributed them systematic ELD workbooks in the middle and the high school grades. And then this year we purchased an additional book for English language arts and Spanish language arts that we sent home. And we're working to we did that for pre-K through 2nd grade, and we're working to do that now for 3rd through 5th as well. Middle school and high school hosted multiple days for students to return materials from last year, textbooks and books, and pick up materials for this year. And again, as Melissa mentioned, most of the schools, I would say almost all schools, have a regular cadence now of how do I get trade books into the hands of students? How do I get materials back that students need? And we're working now to ensure that students also have math manipulatives. And that will be in the 2nd round that happens in November. So one thing that we're proud of actually this year, that we feel like one of the benefits of the shutdown is that it forced many of the departments in the central office to work together. So while we have always tried to work together, what we knew when we closed last year and over the summer is that we had to reorganize the way we were supporting professional learning for educators. So now there's a whole host of webinars, there's office hours, there are resource libraries that include submissions from teachers and that are vetted by our partners in curriculum and instruction and the Department of Technology to say, hey, this is a really good example of distance learning. Watch it if you don't know how to engage students in breakout rooms, or this is how you might host an academic conversation. There's also early release for middle and high school. So every single week, middle and high school teachers are released at the same exact time across the district, which means that not only can they collaborate inside their own school, but across schools across the district, which is really exciting. All new teachers are receiving one-to-one support at least 1 hour weekly, and we've started to create a very big video bank for them to use as well. I don't know, Melissa, if you want to add anything there.
I can speak to this. So one of, we know there have been some questions of, so what if, this is new, this might be new for teachers to teach in a virtual online environment. And so we provided and developed a host of resources and learning opportunities for educators to help build those foundational skills. We did start that back in March, but continued them and made them, strengthened them into August. For example, we had what we call our Digital District Day, which is before teachers actually, the school year starts, we typically host a one-day in-person professional development for educators around digital learning. This year it was fully virtual. We had nearly 3,000 educators participate, and that really kicked off all of our webinars and resources and supports with the learning platforms and new tools and technologies that our teachers would be using with your students.
And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about the shifts in curriculum and instruction. At the beginning of this, Melissa mentioned that we've really embraced anti-racist learning, anti-racist practices, and deeper learning toward the graduate profile. And we did this by first creating some integrated launch units for every single grade level, from pre-K all the way through 12, middle school, high school, and elementary and pre-K teachers received units that really centered students on lifting up the brilliance and assets of every student and building on their strength. What we knew is that students were going through this national pandemic also, right? They needed to be connected to themselves to be able to process what was happening. They needed to be able to connect to one another. They needed to be able to connect to their teacher. And for the first time, we were launching school in a virtual setting. We weren't, oh, you have community and now log back on and you're so excited to see these folks. For kids that were going to new schools or kids new to the school or even new to their teacher, they were coming into a space virtually for the first time ever and not having community to connect back into. So we knew we needed to really lift up the assets, lift up the strengths, connect to students, allow them to connect to another, and also push teachers to say, how do I recognize the skin I'm in and how I might be processing all of the things that are happening in my house? Do I have small children running around? Do I have internet connectivity issues? Am I worried about my own ability to teach a class? Am I distracted by what else is happening in my house when my first grader can't get online? We also wanted to make sure that they had some systems and structures that were in place to be able to see who actually is engaging and how are they engaging. And so those launch units lasted between 2 and 4 weeks, depending on the grade, and were used very widely. And I think you can go to the next one now. We also, the pre-K5 group has continued to create very in-depth lessons. What we know about the pre-K5 curriculum is it wasn't as supportive as the 6th through 12th grade to convert into distance learning. So we continue to create pre-K5 lessons that I'll talk about in a second and put it onto a landing page where teachers can pick it up and grab and go and really use it across the school so that they can really focus on what is it that I'm doing with my students. In 6 through 12, we've shifted to some resource creation because we have the weekly meetings with them for early aligned release. And what we know is that they're learning from one another, which we think is really powerful because there are so many elementary school teachers who weren't able to early align release for the almost 100 elementary schools we had, but we were able to do it for middle and high school. Also at elementary, there are regular engagement with teacher leaders, lit coaches, instructional coaches, assistant principals and principals, and then we continue with our regular office hours. And then finally, working very closely so that every single grown-up on the campus can really support their school sites. How do we ensure that librarians are being able to push into classrooms and engage with students? How do we make sure that the nurse is able to check in with students? So those kinds of things were the things that we worked on creating structures to support during the summer and through the first 6 weeks of school, and really now assessing, is it working? Where is it working? And then finally, I'll just talk a little bit on the next slide about what it looks like. So this morning, for example, if you go to the next one, I was in a classroom where I watched a kindergarten classroom that they were looking for camouflage. So this idea that even inside distance learning, you should have seen the squiggly 30 to 22 kindergartners on there looking for camouflage, first on a screen that the teacher was showing them, then in a video, and then around their house. Could they find things that were camouflaged, and coming back with pillows where their stuffed animals were camouflaged into their pillows. So really trying to think through 4 learning pursuits that comes from the work of Gholdy Muhammad, who wrote the book Cultivating Genius. So we've been rewriting our curriculum through that lens. And the 4 areas are identity and community. So how does my instruction help students to learn something about themselves and learn something about others? Intellect. How is my instruction, or how is the class building on students' identity, interests, knowledge, and intellect? Skills. How am I specifically building on the skills and strengths of each student? And criticality. How am I engaging students in critical thinking? So not just enough to sit there and be on the screen, but to really think about what does it mean to understand this, which is especially important for our youngest learners that are trying to learn to read. And with that, we also relaunched the SF Loves Learning, which you can see daily. It's focused on pre-K second, and it really models some anti-racist content and pedagogy, elevating students' identities. And if you haven't really checked it out, it's had a real facelift over the summer. So I think people would really love to see it. And we're encouraging educators then to bring in the weekly messages from the pre-K2 SF Loves Learning into their classroom, to make it a space of joy, and to understand that it's not going to look exactly the same as it will in the classroom, but you can still get your wiggles out, you can still sing a hello song, and hopefully you're seeing that kind of joy in the classroom. And I think I'm going to pass back to Jean. Is that right, Melissa?
To Jean.
I should have had my finger on the unmute button. So my name's Jean Robertson. Hello, everybody. I am the Chief of Special Education in San Francisco. Happily, in this role, I was a principal for many, many years and a teacher before that. And I was a mom of 2 kids, and I loved the PTA. You have saved me so many times over the years in building the school. So I'm glad to share this space with you and to talk to you a little bit tonight about the supports we have for students in special populations. So if you go on to the next slide, we actually had a lot to share with you tonight, but I'm looking at the clock and we're already way over time. So I'm really glad that we pulled back on some of the slides. I'm going to give you a very broad overview. Our supports for special populations start with students with individualized educational plans. These are the kids that are my charge. I think they've always been my charge. Our commitment to these kids starts with a family partnership. Given that you're in the home with students on IEPs, it's paramount that we talk to you and find out what's working, how's it going, what's the capacity of your child. And we're developing what we call emergency learning plans. In the spring, we call them distance learning plans. But with the new bill that came out, we have to pump them up and really strengthen them. We've learned that what we offered early on wasn't rigorous enough and didn't really meet the standard of FAPE. So it's important, if you have a child on an IEP, that you're having a conversation with your IEP team and you're developing that plan together. Now, the kids in the focal populations, have been identified, and we're honing in on all of them. English language learners have unique needs, and those needs are being met through ELD set-asides every day, the 30 minutes, and differentiated approaches and curriculum that the teachers are implementing through the distance learning platform. So there's a lot of training that's happening for both of these populations. There's capacity building going on. We have office hours weekly with our teachers where they can come together and tap the resource of a supervisor or a teacher on special assignment in the departments, either multilingual or special ed, and with each other. We're setting up conditions where they can just check in with each other to see what's working and what's not. We're also leaning heavily and encouraging parents to call the family link line if there's any kind of struggle or concern or curiosity that you might have. And our folks on the family link line are able to follow up. It's a fine run machine at this point, and there's great follow-up. They will make sure that they're addressing your needs. Another focal population are foster, homeless, sheltered, and recently detained students. Everybody in these populations struggle anyway. They're in a space of vulnerability as it is, and the pandemic has only compounded some of the issues. Earlier, we talked about the coordinated care team efforts at each school site. These kids are absolutely flagged, and there's a wraparound at school site level to keep their eye on these kids to make sure that they're getting what they need. And I'm going to go down to the next one is students who are challenged to engage. We actually were able to determine from the spring which kids were not accessing. And obviously some of that was due to not having the proper technology, but there were also other barriers that were standing in the way to kids logging on every day. And so again, the coordinated care team is flagging. We know who those kids are, and we know to lean in and have regular checks with them. One other thing that I didn't mention is that we are tapping interpretation on demand through a language line. We understand that some families do not speak English in the home, and it's very difficult for them to support their child online every day. So we're trying to build the capacity of interpretation efforts for those families so that they can support. Our youngest learners, we were most concerned about, because we think, how can you put a toddler on Zoom? I just got a picture of a dear friend of mine, a 3-year-old who's in the DHH program at Cesar Chavez, and he does not miss Zoom. He wears his sunglasses to every single class. For some reason, he wants to wear his sunglasses. He loves seeing his friends. So the early ed department has just completely knocked it out of the park to meet the needs and to engage the little kids. And we are continuing to meet regularly at the central office level to learn what's working and how to build bridges among us. So that's just a brief update. Happy to go deeper at any time or answer any questions at the end. And I'm going to pass it on to whoever has the next slide.
I'm back. Wanted to, and I'm just gonna be mindful of the clock here. Just share some of the family supports that we've put in place for this fall. Again, hearing the feedback and needs from our families as learning is happening at home. There's a lot of new technology in particular, but just sort of new and different ways that learning is taking place, and the supports that families need in order to support their children during distance learning. And so some of those resources that we have here, and I believe we'll be providing the slide deck, but these resources are all available on our website at sfusd.edu. And just want to draw attention to our distance learning guide for families, which is on the website and outlines what families should expect, can expect from distance learning, and where to go to for if you have questions and support and need support. And one of the big things is how to stay informed. Hopefully families on the call have signed up to Parent View, which is our district family portal. And the key there is by signing up, we're able to get your contact information, your updated cell phone numbers and email addresses so that you can receive our weekly family digests that go out on Wednesdays. We have a text program that is relaunching very soon, focused on our PK2, where you can access the student and family handbook and the student and family rights to make sure that you have the information and frequently asked questions that are available. And so wanting to make sure that you're all aware of how to connect and stay informed. And of course, our board meetings, and we do have another one coming up on Tuesday. Oops, sorry about that. Look at that. I clicked in the wrong place. And let me go back 1 second here. Okay, let me make sure I didn't realize that was a link. I keep doing the same thing. Here we go. Okay. We have a host of resources that are available. I know this slide can look a little overwhelming, but these are all quick links. We've mentioned our family and student resource link, which is sort of the help desk. You can email, you can call. The central offices, we've all reorganized ourselves to have support and staff available to answer questions. For the technology, we have videos, learning how to charge a hotspot and how does that work, making videos and FAQs available for families, and those are all on the website as well. And then just wanted to make a special plug for our live webinars. We also heard, we've been providing webinars for our educators to help them learn the new tools and platforms. And we've made those available for families. We started back in September with the basics of getting started with devices and hotspots. And now we're focused on learning all the different apps and platforms that your students, your children are using and that you might be using as well. So those all take place during the 5:30 to 6:30 block. The dates are here and you can get information on our website as well. And with that, I'm going to, for our last section of our presentation, I'm going to kick it over to Jill Hoogendyk, our Chief of Staff.
All right, I'll try to bring this down the home stretch because I know that there are also a few questions that folks have that we will try to answer. So as you are likely aware, we have chunked out this year into 3 phases. We realized early on that we were not going to be able to start the school year in person. So we were in phase 1 of distance learning. And we are turning our attention to phase 2, which is a gradual return and hybrid. We call it gradual return and hybrid because we know that while we do not have an anticipated start date for phase 2, we will not be able to bring back 54,000 students all in the same day. So the team is working now to work with our decision tree, which I think is on the next slide, because there are both external and internal indicators that we need to pay attention to as we plan for this gradual return. On the left-hand side here, you will see some of the California state and county indicators and directives, many of which we have met at this point in time, and we are working in that second column there on our operational indicators. Those are not listed in sequential order, and each of those indicators have several other steps that we need to attend to before we start to bring students back and our staff back, because our primary focus in this course is the health and well-being of our students, staff, and families. So we need to get to yes on all of these boxes here, and there are also some logistics that we need to attend to as we think about bringing students and schools back. We've got a set of priority students for what we're calling the first wave of return. But this logistics decision tree gives you a sense of the types of things that we need to be thinking about and accounting for as we make those decisions and then start communicating with our families and our staff. As we are identifying sites for reopening, which will require the longest on-ramp of prep work, and a lot of that work has already been underway. And as Michelle stated, I think Dawn Kamalanathan will be at your next meeting, and she will be able to answer all those logistics questions. We need to determine how many seats, right? So we have classrooms of 20, 35 students, but the current guidelines say that we have to have much smaller cohorts, and those cohorts have to be able to stay together in order to protect the whole population. We will be prioritizing target student groups. We will be looking at those schedules, which also include things like transportation and getting all of that online to bring students back. And this gives you a glimpse, and you may have seen this before, but in this first wave, we're looking at 3 particular student groups. Our pre-K early education students, our youngest learners in PK through first grade, because there are a lot of critical learning activities that take place, getting students ready to read. And then our pre-K through grade 13 students with moderate severe disabilities. And these are students that are in our special day classes. Our superintendent will be giving the board and the public an update on where we are with those indicators at our board meeting next Tuesday. So want to make sure that we invite all of you to attend that session on Tuesday, the 20th. Okay. All right, phew. And we can take some questions.
All right, thank you. That was a lot of information. Thank you for sharing that, all of you. And then I also neglected to recognize that we had one of our district leaders here, Joya Balk, who's an executive director with the district, is also here. So thank you for being here. So I think that there are a lot of the questions that people pre-submitted that you all covered in that presentation. And so there's just a few that I'm going to pull out in this time that we have left. One that came up in a sort of a variety of fashions is how are assessments working right now? How do we know that students are making progress with their learning? How are teachers assessing that? And then also, how is the district evaluating and assessing how teachers are doing with this? How do they know that they're able to do well with this, where they need support? Is just how in general are we looking at assessing progress and evaluating during this time? Whoever wants to take that. I don't know if that's Jen.
You want me to start?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So there's a few ways. The first part of this around how we're assessing learning, some of this comes again directly from the bills, the Senate and Assembly bills that were passed around what we need to do to ensure that we're looking at what's called, they call it learning loss. I prefer to think about it as unfinished learning from the year before. And so we're required to give particular assessments right now. Actually, we're giving them the math milestone, which is the same math milestone we usually give in the fall, and the RI, which stands for the reading inventory. And that's so we can compare students to the same assessment from the year before. What we've tried to do is, because this is distance learning, we've tried to lower the stakes. We don't want kids to be stressed out about this. This isn't really about whether or not they did a good job. This is about figuring out, what do they know on this measure that we usually give at this time of the year, and how do we adjust what we're doing in the classroom to better serve them? We're also working very closely, LEAD, which is the group that supervises principals in schools, special education, the assessment office, and curriculum, to get together and say, all right, if we're not going to teach all the standards for this year, if we're only going to teach some of them, what are the major ones we need to teach? What would it look like to be proficient in this? And what would it look like in distance learning? How do you see it? So that's sort of a work in progress. And I think every every week we get a little better at it, and we get a little better at how you can demonstrate it in alternate ways. And then in terms of supporting teachers, office hours and things like that, we're really leveraging those times for teachers to come together and say, I don't know how, to do this particular thing, because first supporting them with the foundations of technology. Do you know how to get on your Zoom? Do you know how to start Google Meet? And then how do I figure out what to do with all the, if you watch a Zoom class of little kids, it's like bouncing, like whack-a-mole. And if you watch a Zoom class of big kids, it's like no screens on. So what we need to do with each educator is slightly different. And I'll defer also to the rest of my colleagues to add anything I might have missed.
Nope.
No, that's good. I would just add that part of the state legislation also, we would do this anyway, but we have surveys that we're doing of staff and educators. And that is to sort of see how they're doing, check in, get feedback, somewhat similar to the wellness checks with families. And so those are underway right now as well.
And Jen's point earlier, our lead team of assistant soups and directors have been in direct communication with site leaders, and we're working to identify themes of both challenges and opportunities, bright spots that are happening, so that we can share good ideas, but also work to align our supports across departments to help fill in any of the gaps that those leaders are identifying.
Thank you so much for that information. That's really helpful. Let's see, we have another question that's sort of related. Has the district set goals that help measure what we think success is as a district right now? Because of course, this year is not the same as last year in sort of a normal year, which who knows what normal really is, but has the district set its own definition of success for the 2021 school year?
I don't know that we've set what I think people would describe more as a dashboard. What I will say is that we've completed that first round of wellness checks, and our RPA team is in the process of analyzing that data across other factors, because of course, as you saw from presentations throughout the spring, we're looking at participation. One of the other components coming out of SB 98 is around attendance. And so as we're hitting the 6-week mark and we have wellness data, we'll have some baseline information by which to start making some of those decisions about what we would want to see as targets. But ultimately, we are looking for increased participation because we know that that was a big factor and a big concern from all of the stakeholder groups that we heard from across the district, paying specific attention to our students on free and reduced price lunch, our Latinx families, our English learners, our students with disabilities, and our African American students. So those are all key student groups that we're attending to. Oh, thank you, Melissa. Acronyms.
I know that's the thing we have to when we're all in these spaces. A
everything.
lot is remembering there's lots of families who are not used to the alphabet soup of education. So yeah, anytime you all can help with it, that's great. We've received a question also that says, I want to know if children with IEP who in language, this is a Spanish speaking parent who's asking this, want to know if children with IEPs have been or are currently being evaluated.
Well, that's the question of the day. So evaluations are being done as best they can through a distance learning situation, because we don't have everything set up yet to do in-place assessments. We're doing the best we can. But I would say it's probably my highest priority to get the assessment hub. I'm calling them hubs. That's the word of the day. So we have a lot in place for the plan to bring in-person assessments back. You can imagine the backlog that we have to address before us. So it's imperative that we put that at the very highest priority for me at this point in what I do. So what I can share with you, if you have a request, I know I got one tonight, definitely send it in a formal email so that it's part of the record, and we will set you up with we call it sort of an intake situation. I don't love that word, but that's what we call it. And we will get you on board to begin the process of assessment.
Thank you for that. All right, let's see. Another question is, let's see, we've got a few minutes left. How are we going to narrow our focus here? I think there might be some confusion on what hybrid really means when we talk about hybrid learning. Does that mean that we are having some students who are both in person and remote sometimes? Does that mean that some students are always going to be remote and some students are always going to be in person? Or how are you all defining that as a district? Because we probably all have friends all over the country who are defining it in different ways. So what do you mean when you say that as a district?
Well, we're going to be flexible with our definition, because what we say now might turn out differently because we have not done this before. And so we have been pairing the word hybrid with gradual return, right? And so hybrid can take on all of those definitions that you've just described, because we recognize that we will likely be rolling out a gradual return with smaller cohorts. We do see this as a space where some students will be in person and some students will be in distance learning to start. We also recognize that with Senate Bill 98, families will still have the option to maintain distance learning, even though schools are going back for in-person. And there are all sorts of varied reasons for why that might happen. So to say that we've landed on an exact definition of what hybrid is, I don't think that we're quite there yet. And I can see a world where that definition is going to shift over time as we increase the number of schools that have opened.
Thank you. And related, as we're talking about bringing these small groups of students back that you all described in the 2A, that's the very youngest students, and then that next group, and our students with moderate to severe disabilities. Do you have any idea what the logistics of that will be? Because if you have a classroom, as you all mentioned already, that it may be larger than the number of students who can be in one space when we come back. And so if you have a classroom that perhaps has students who are immunocompromised, who have, a very elderly person living with them and they cannot be in person, but they're part of a class, or a teacher even who cannot be in person, how do the logistics of that work out? And I'm sure that's part of the puzzle you're trying to figure out as you figure out how to bring people back, but can you give us an idea of how you all are trying to figure those things out?
We are trying to figure them out. So I think it's not even like a 2D puzzle, it's a bit of a 3D puzzle, because as we're identifying locations and making sure that our facilities are attending to all of the safety structures that would need to be in place, we have the very real factors of human beings, right? So we know that some teachers will be able to, and support staff. There's a lot of folks and staff members on a given school that do very many things to serve our students and families. And we recognize that some of them will be able to come back for in-person and some of them won't, right? We also recognize that some students will be able to come back in person and some students won't. And how all of those numbers shake out is the giant question mark. And so how we attend to that and formulate those classes to make sure that we're maximizing on a very limited number of human resources to be able to serve our students, we're going to have to start to look at how that puzzle comes together once we are in the place of getting some of those numbers.
Thank you. It's, as I sort of expected the answer to be, it's really complicated.
Yeah,
complicated. I realize we're at 8:30, but I wonder, do you all have just a couple more minutes for a couple questions? You need to rush off. If you do, it's totally fine. I don't see any shaking of heads. I want to try to just squeeze in a couple of quick questions because I know they've been hot on a lot of parents' minds. We know that the district is working on an MOU, which is a memorandum of understanding. So that's an agreement that our district is making with our teachers union to negotiate how to keep everybody safe and having good working conditions as they're coming back to have whatever hybrid learning looks like. Can you tell us at all, and just for all the parents, if you don't know this, there are, when our district is negotiating with its partners, our collective bargaining units, there are some things they can't talk about publicly. You know, it's just part of negotiations. That's just sort of the rules of it. They can't negotiate in public, you know? And so, but can you tell us at all what some of the topics that you all are talking about so people know what is included in those negotiations? Just even if it's a very high level overview, because a lot of people aren't familiar with how these processes work.
Right. So as you've stated, we can't really talk about what has been on those agendas because that is part of the bargaining agreement. I think we are all paying attention to what you saw there on the decision tree. So those indicators, I think, are a good place where we're all putting all of our attention.
All right, thank you. And then let's see. Two quick things is, what kinds of opportunities is the district going to put in place for feedback from students, families, educators, administrators, as we're navigating this time so that we can let you know what's working, what's not working. You know, nobody has a monopoly on great ideas. There might be people who say, hey, this could work really well. And how is the district providing a structure so that that can happen on a regular basis throughout this year?
Right. Well, as many of you are aware, we engaged families in a number of ways throughout the spring. There were surveys, there were town halls, and there were some work groups. So as we head into phase 2, we are getting ready to re-engage and activate our work groups. And so as we roll out those plans, we will be sure to communicate all the very many ways that you can provide input and feedback. Because we know that that's important. We know it's important for folks to have a voice in this process and recognize that we often hear both sides of the coin about how all of things are happening, but it's important for us to get as much feedback as we can because we do look for themes. And Melissa kicked us off with the 3 C's at the beginning of clarity and communication and consistency. And that's just a really good example of themes that came up from the feedback that we got from families in the spring that really have served as anchors for our work as we've guided and have guided our planning.
Thank you. And then we'll say for our final question, you have a lot of parent leaders in this meeting with us right now, and there are a lot of people we've been recording this video and we post it. The Second District PTA has a YouTube channel, and a lot of people go back and watch these meetings. So people who weren't able to join us will go back when they do have time. And so I'm wondering if any of you have some advice on how parent leaders can support their schools and the families in their schools right now. What are you hearing? Just any tips you might have, because I think it's a really dedicated group of parents across this district who are just trying to do their best to support our students, but also support our families who feel so unsupported in this pandemic across the board because of leadership at a lot of different levels. And so they're just looking to do their best. So what advice would you have for them? Any or all of you?
I have advice.
Please, Jane.
You started that, I'll share too.
All right. Well, you asked. And like I said, I've worked so closely with my PTAs over the years that I feel like right now, I'll be honest with you, everybody is way up here. Like this lift is not getting any easier as the days go on. And so if we keep our focus on the child, always on the child first, I think that that's super important. But Nikki is not with us tonight, and Nikki always says, have grace and compassion. So before you flash, because you're going to be frustrated, we are all frustrated. There's not a day that goes by. I think that breathing piece is really important, and just go to the principal and vent and share, and then make a plan together. Don't one-off, really do it thoughtfully and with togetherness and grace and compassion.
Thanks for that, Jean.
Yes, I was also going to share the grace and compassion. Today is Wednesday, and I believe our family digest has gone out, and we are all inundated with lots of information and lot that we're trying to make sense of and unpack. But those digests are really chock full of helpful information and resources. And so working with your school community to help ensure that families are receiving those digests, that they're able to access the information. I know, as I shared, I have a 5th grader in the district. I know the school PTA and the principal often pull in some of that. Repeating information is okay because we get lots of emails and texts and ways that we're, receiving information. So repeating is not a bad thing. And so being able to share that information out with your school communities to really amplify and make sure that, and to help ensure that we're reaching as many families as possible.
Another piece of great advice.
I would just add one more thing, which is
Yes, please.
Yeah, I would add one more thing, which is look and see who's coming and who's not, right? Like when you look to see these meetings, who's showing up at the meetings and whose students grown up is not showing up at the meetings, and can you get in touch with them, because maybe they're not getting the email or the family digest or the text message, and the call from you could really make a difference in a time where people are just struggling. And a call to say, hey, how are you? I see you. You need anything? You need me to tell you what's happening? Do you need me to just listen? Can be really just as important as all of the tech tips and all of that, and interpreting it through the way you know how to do it with other families. So I would say look around and see who you see and see who you don't see. And remember that everybody loves their kids to death. So if they're not there, it's because they can't figure out how to get there.
And I guess I would say that, I mean, all of this is connected, but a little appreciation goes a long way. Know that your teachers and your paraeducators and your principals are working extremely hard to make good things happen for your students while they're navigating a pandemic in their own households. And we hear a lot about what's not working, right? Those are the people you call the resource link line because something's not working and you need help. But it's also really helpful to find out what is working, because when we can collect that level of information, that becomes good information to be able to share with others, that might be paths forward for connecting with more students. So if you've got some bright spots, please let your site leaders and your teachers know those things are happening too. That gives them the little charge to keep going in very stressful times.
Those are really great and welcome pieces of advice. Thank you for all of those. Some of them remind me of a few weeks ago, we had a guest speaker come on who's a coach who gave us advice on how to manage stress right now, and there were a few things that were about acknowledging what's working, taking time to sit and reflect on that, breathing, a lot of breathing, and being in touch with people. There was some advice about having listening partners who you can just call and just get it all out, and then receive it back. And so there's a lot lined up with the things that all of you just shared. So thank you for that. As we close out the night, I know we're a few minutes behind. Thank you for everybody who has stayed around. Just want to appreciate all of you amazing and women leaders, which is so exciting. We just have a whole room full of women leaders presenting to us, and we really appreciate the time and know that you've been working overtime since this started now 7 months ago, and maybe you didn't expect it to go this long. Maybe you did, I don't know, I didn't. So we appreciate all the time that you're putting, and that you're putting the extra time to be here. It's now 8:40 on a Wednesday, and I know you've had lots of long meetings. And I do want to give a shout out about the communication. When my kids started in SFUSD 15 years ago, the communication was not like this. I mean, it can, of course it can be better. We can always do it better, but it has made there's such a improvement, and we appreciate that. And we'll continue to help you figure out how to keep improving it. So thank you all for your time. Thank you to all of the people who are attending today. If your question wasn't answered, please go ahead and send it along, and I have some, and if we can help get information for you, we will. We are going to keep doing this. I will tell you that, as you heard, Dr. Ford Morthell couldn't join us tonight. She had a family emergency, but when I called and asked her to do this with us, she replied back with like, yes, in capital letters and multiple exclamation points, and really, really was excited to come, and was sad she couldn't come tonight, and wants to come and join us on a regular basis, not just kind of one-off. And so we're going to try to make that happen and create more of these casual conversations. They're so different than when we're doing board meetings and it's very formal presentations. And so we'd love to do more of this to create access for our parents and caregivers to connect with all of you. So thank you so much. Thank you everybody for being here. A reminder, 2 weeks, we'll have another one of these with our Chief Facilities Officer. You've already seen the invite, but we'll put it out to you again. And we'll post this video by Friday. You'll see it in your emails, and it'll be on our YouTube channel. Thank you all, and have a wonderful night. And thanks to our interpreters for being here all night. Appreciate you. All right. Good night.
Good night.